Dum 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 da 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 da. This is our intro music. Da, 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 da. Hello,
That's nice.
everybody, and welcome
Did you
again to
write
the
that?
Sacred
That's
Life.
good.
Yeah, I did. I wrote it. Anyway, hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Sacred Life. As usual, I am your host, David Baylor. I forgot to do the thing that I always forget to do when John comes on, and
But
actually
you
have
wanted
my.
to hide me for a little while.
Um, I want to remain anonymous, so I don't have my name. I'm just named the Sacred Life.
Yeah.
But anyway, welcome everybody to the show. As you might have guessed, the infamous John Bug-Eyed Feller has joined us tonight, and contrary to popular opinion, we are actually not the same person. um, Anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about grace. Like, what is grace? How does, I guess, more like how does grace operate? How do we receive grace? How does God grant grace to us? And there's really quite a lot. I don't know, a lot of interesting, I think, conversation to have there. But before we get into that, just remind everybody once again, check out our illustrious sponsor, which is me, actually, Gregorius Iconography. You can find links to that in the description. I am an iconographer with the Orthodox Church. So
And
I'd
you
appreciate
said
you check it out.
illustrious, our illustrious sponsor, and you can see that with all the glimmering gold.
Yes, glimmering gold, like actual gold, in fact. That's real gold, folks. Anyway, yeah, so I'm the sponsor. You can check that out. I do iconography, I do custom work, commissions. I also sell some prints of some of my past work, things like that. And I'm always interested in taking inquiries. That's all I have to say for now. There's some other things I guess we can talk about later, but for now, I'm going to throw it to you, John, and let's kind of get into the conversation here.
Okay, good. So you mentioned, how does grace come to us? How how does God impart grace to people, or what are the means of grace? Some people might say. So I'm going to just quickly rattle off a list of some different answers to this question, and as the talk progresses, we'll talk about some of these different items on the list. For the most part, if you really wanted to, you could look at this list and you could say, oh, well, this is what the Calvinists would say, and this is what the Protestants, Lutheran style Protestants, would typically say, and this is what Catholics or what Orthodox, like you can kind of say, like, well, different major branches of Christianity will sort of give one answer to the question. And I think we'll see that there are a lot of good answers on here.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so one source of grace, you could say, would just be just God alone, and that grace is totally unmerited. That means there's nothing that we can do. There's something from our human perspective. There's something arbitrary about whether God gives His grace to us. But again, there's nothing that we could do to entice His favor. You could have a sacramental or a ritual view of where grace comes from, and you probably wouldn't have this as the only vision, but this would be the sacraments are blessed by God and given to us as a gift from God, and when we participate in them, they are like a vehicle for His grace. You could say grace comes from faith alone, and that's the only thing that you could do that could draw God's grace into your life, is by having faith in Him. And if we have this sola fide kind of approach, then probably by faith you mean a belief that you would hold. You could say grace comes through works, and that would be like the particularly anti-Protestant way of saying it, because the Protestant will be or anti-Lutheran maybe, because the Lutheran style Protestant would be very much into grace comes through faith and not by works. Anything that looks like works is not really grace at all. So you could say it comes through works, but you could also define this a little differently. Rather than the word works, you could say grace comes to us when we do the will of God. Mm-hmm. Grace comes to us when we cooperate with the divine will or with the divine energies. And we'll get into that, I think, a little bit as our conversation progresses. Then, lastly, I'll just rattle off a bunch of different ideas that I think we'll talk about a little bit less. Prayer, spiritual disciplines, scripture, worship, preaching, fellowship with other Christians, and the life of the church. These are some other things that you could say, well, this could be a means of grace. If you engage in these things, you are inviting the grace of God into your life.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the kind of broad list that I'll sort of work from. And I haven't tried to capture every possible answer to the question, but I tried to get a lot of the main streams in my answer there. Now, we'll go into some of these individually, but David, I don't know if you had a reaction to the list as a whole, or a few comments you want to make before we get started.
I mean, there's a lot of things I'd like to say. Some of it I think I should probably just wait until you kind of get into what you have to say. I think you'll probably answer a lot of the points that I would raise. One thing I would say, I should have had like a uh, a, a pen and paper ready and like scribble down these things while you're sharing them, so I could remember every point to go through.
Yeah.
But the first one, especially that you shared, this like, oh, I don't remember how it is you phrased it,
The,
but the
the
way,
unmerited grace,
yeah, the unmerited
or,
grace.
I refer to this as like the arbitrary will of God.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Which
go for it.
is, I don't know that anybody actually holds to that.
To
Uh,
I mean, to the idea of unmerited, or well, I guess
well, no, but just in the way
describe
that
what you
you,
mean, because these are theological terms, or
yes, I
especially
know, but like
unmerited grace.
in the way that you phrase it, I don't remember what you said that stuck out to me in particular.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I think there might be some like really, really strict interpretations of Calvinist theology.
Right.
That, think something along those lines. But for the most part, I think we're, even if we don't realize it, generally going to have some kind of sense in which the things that we do matter to some degree. But I think, I don't know, I think the way a lot of people get around that is by how they define grace. So it might actually be, I don't know, it might actually be important for us at some point to kind of nail down that term a little bit.
Yeah. Right.
Uh,
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to kick around some of these ideas about what imparts grace to us, and for right now, just kind of keep it like a sense of a little bit of mystery of what grace is, which is
yeah.
okay. I mean, it is a little bit mysterious. Later on, at some point, I do want to talk about some different definitions of grace, because that's obviously a big part of the question right here.
Well,
With
yes, because I think like if I would object to some of these things, that objection might not make sense to somebody who holds to a like a vastly different definition of grace than I do.
Yeah, yeah,
And so that's kind of what comes to my mind here. It's like I know you don't want to jump ahead on that and define grace and lay this all down. But I'm just like trying to run through my mind. It's like, well, how do I talk about this? Because the word grace means such vastly different things to different groups of people.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you're holding to this idea of unmerited grace, then there's a couple different. I still won't try to give a single, like, here's the definition of grace, but you might have an idea that grace is grace is that gift of God that brings us into a state of forgiveness,
Hmm.
that makes us blameless before the judge. Grace is the thing that draws us into salvation and eternal life.
Hmm.
And I would say that's a sort of a limited view of what grace is and what all it could entail. But I would say like those things would be very important if you have this idea of unmerited grace. There's nothing that we as people can do to earn the grace of God.
Yeah. Right.
And you said you don't think anybody really holds to this. And like I say, that's a theological term.
Well,
And
yes. But then that's kind of why I shifted gears a little bit and started talking about like, well, it does kind of depend on what you mean actually by grace.
yeah, right.
Because what I would mean by that is what I would conceive of grace as being as an Orthodox Christian. Um, the claim of totally unmerited grace like doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
And that's not what people, that's not what, I don't think that's what people who are proclaiming this term as what they teach. I don't think that's what they're teaching, like in terms of my definition of grace. And so
Yeah,
that's why I kind of shifted again to say like, well, it depends on what you mean by grace, actually.
right. Okay, so certainly, and we'll see this again with when we get to faith and sola fide. But if somebody's holding to this unmerited grace, then I think there would certainly be criticism of somebody who views works, you doing the work of God, as in any way bringing you into a state of grace or bringing grace into your life. I would think they would be generally critical of that idea or of that language in particular. Um, and probably also the idea that the sacraments would be bringing grace into your life. I would think they would also just tend to be really skeptical of that.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the things that I think you're gonna stand up for and value. Um, one now, before I criticize the idea too much, I should also say that the grace that comes into our lives is like we can't do things to deserve the good gifts of God. This of course these other things, works and rituals, and those are not about deserving the good gifts of God. That would still be the wrong language to describe it. But this unmerited grace view is going to be really insistent. Like there's nothing that you can do to deserve the goodness of God and to deserve his gifts. And I would say that that is certainly true. And
Right.
I
And so
think,
I'll interrupt you there
yeah, go
briefly
for
and
it.
say, I don't know of any group, any Christian group, who claims that there is anything that you can do to deserve the gifts of God.
Yeah, right.
And then this is an important thing. I think it's important for us to repeatedly be clear on this point. So I, as an Orthodox Christian, would not believe that I can earn God's favor by my works. I wouldn't
Hmm.
believe that by the things that I do, I merit any kind of grace,
Yeah, yeah, right.
or I merit any saving grace, you might say.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't know. There's a lot of criticisms of orthodoxy when we're talking about this subject in particular, that I don't know. They really fall back to what I was saying earlier about having fundamentally different definitions of these terms.
Yeah, right.
And so if I say something about grace and about cooperating in the work of God and the synergistic operation of God's grace, if you're using a definition of grace more like what a Calvinist is using, then it sounds like we're saying like what you're saying here, like that we're saying we can merit God's grace and favor.
Hmm.
Well, we're not.
Yeah, right.
But
Right.
it's just very important to be clear about that.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a lot of statements I think you're going to say when talking about these Protestant ideas that at face value I'm going to agree with the words that you're saying,
Hmm.
but might not agree with like the particular Protestant concept that you're getting at.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, and I'm trying to sort of highlight that with this one in particular, because this is one. Um, there are ways that I definitely want to criticize this idea of unmerited grace, and yet I think it's also important to say like that idea that's built into it, that you can't merit or deserve the good gifts of God, is very important. There's something, this notion struck me a long time ago, and I've carried this with me for many years. We, as people and as human beings, but I think also like Americans, we have this kind of built-in desire to earn the things that we have, and to be able to insist at the end of the day, I earned everything I got in this life.
Yeah.
And even that is not like totally unhealthy and foolish, but I've just had this thought for many years that one thing that I was never able to earn or to deserve was my first breath.
Hmm.
And I mean, like in a sense, your first breath is everything. Like this life that I have, there's no way that I could earn this life or that I could deserve my own existence. So this is a gift that's given to me because of, again, like nothing good of my own.
Right.
And so I mean, I think those ideas are very important for wisdom and very important for the Christian. You know, this notion of like what I can and can't earn. Like I want to have a realistic notion of that. But again, we're not really talking about earning things. But the critics of some of the things that will say, oh, you're just trying to earn God's grace by whatever means.
Yeah. Right.
We'll be talking about something a little different. So there's my defense of the unmerited grace. Why don't you launch into a little bit of criticism of this?
Well, I mean, like I said, I don't really have a ton of criticism for this because,
Hmm.
um, I mean, I agree. You don't merit grace. And so, even though, I would say as an Orthodox Christian that, grace operates synergistically with our works. So, for example, when I am baptized, then I am participating, and I'm participating in the work of God. And because I'm participating in the work of God, I become a recipient of God's grace. And that's true. Like, for example, right now is the season of Lent, and I'm fasting. I have my Lenten feast of lentils and cabbage, because it's a season of fasting. Like, and that's something, is, there's a kind of grace that operates through these ascetic practices and these kinds of things. But at the same time, I don't merit grace. And so it's
Hmm.
by my ascetic discipline that I will earn some kind of grace. Like that's never the point of anything.
Yeah,
And so I have no problem affirming unmerited grace the way we're talking about it right now.
yeah. Okay, now I might also use the phrase that the arbitrary will of God, and arbitrary in the sense that I can't I can't really do anything to bring grace into my life.
Right.
Just like if I happen to be one that's predestined, then I will receive it.
Yeah, and that's nonsense. Like this just, totally destroys any operation of the will, of the free will. Like, I don't know. It's anthropologically a disaster, and there's all kinds of other theological problems that you're going to introduce by having an idea like this. Um yeah, there's just whole rabbit trails I can run down with
Yeah,
it. But like it's just something that doesn't work at all with patristic anthropology, with biblical anthropology, biblical ontology, these things. I'm sorry if I'm using smart sounding words, but I'm just trying to briefly make the point. Like this, I don't know, like it just breaks down. It's like a system that tries to deal with a dilemma that it's created and really fails because it just ends up creating more problems than what it is trying to solve. But God's will is never arbitrary. The operation of God's grace, of God's energies, is never arbitrary. And so, like, the idea of the arbitrary operation of God's grace is just ridiculous on its face.
yeah. And if I say arbitrary, I mean like from my perspective, in the sense that like it doesn't have anything to do with what I've done. You know, I'm not calling it like the random will of God, but arbitrary again in the sense that like um it doesn't matter if I go out and do the good works. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter if I worship and pray. It doesn't matter if I have like do whatever it takes to strengthen my faith, whatever that might look like.
yeah.
None of those things are going to like convince God to give
Well,
me more
there's
or
a
less
really
grace.
serious there's a really serious dilemma, a really serious problem that you introduce with that kind of thinking, which is that if none of the good things that I do to meet oh, I mean, let me back up a step. First of all, and say I also would affirm that oh, how is it? Can you rephrase how you said that again? Uh like the
I said a lot of things, but I don't know. Like, there's nothing that I can do to get more or less grace from God in my life.
Yes, yes. And so I would affirm that. Like there is nothing that I can do to get more or less of God's grace in my life. Um but it's a different concept to say I can choose to participate or not participate in the grace that God extends.
Hmm.
So I like that that's a different idea. That's a
Yeah,
different
yeah.
um because the problem that you have if you don't think that, like I think you have to think that if you're a Christian, because the problem that you have if you don't is that if there's nothing that I can do to participate and become increasingly a participant in God's grace, so if none of the good things that I do make me a participant in God's grace, then none of the bad things that I do separate me from the grace of God.
Hmm.
Like
Right.
you have to that's just the logical conclusion that I think that you have to come to. And I know some people might argue against that and say like that's a straw man or that's not what we believe, but it's like it's a logical contradiction if you don't believe that.
Hmm.
Um and so that's my problem that I have with that way of thinking is, well, everybody realizes that if I do something bad and if I choose to live a life of sin, then this is separating me from the grace of God. So, like I said, if you're not going to have if you're not going to have a logical contradiction, you have to believe that the good things I do also make me a participant in God's grace.
Hmm.
Um, make me filled more and more with God's grace, however you want to say that. Now, I know like hard Calvinist theology will say like they recognize the logical contradiction and at least are honest with it and say, well, nothing you can do separates you from the grace of God because if you did those things, you never had it to begin with.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I won't dwell on this one too much more because there's lots of other items just on that list that I gave you, and then there's a few other things that I think we want to talk about as well.
Right.
But yeah, I appreciate the comments, how quick you are to agree with with the position and with the language of the position. And that might be really helpful as we move into some of these other things um, that other people that are sympathetic with that position will want to criticize you for your position.
Mhm.
And I think some of the comments you made there will be helpful in defending against that. Okay, so
Yeah,
we'll move
because
on to
because like I
yeah,
said, most of those criticisms just aren't actually criticizing the Orthodox position.
yeah, right. Yeah, it and when we get into like works inviting grace or we're participating in grace, maybe I'll try to stick with that language a little bit more. Um, your works participating in the grace of God, which means you experience the grace more fully,
Mhm.
then somebody might look at that and say like, oh, so you're talking like works-based salvation, so you think your works are going to merit something that God is going to give you because you've deserved it through your works. But again, like the way that you responded to this last one, I think sets up like, no, we're talking about something different here.
Well, so I will like interrupt you there and say yes, works-based salvation, but no to my works merit something.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to follow that up, or you just want
We'll just leave that for now.
to? Okay. All right. Okay, so then we'll move on to this sacramental or ritual view of grace. And actually, this is a lot of reason why I wanted to have this talk because we've been talking so much about ritual practices and iconography and trying to trying to make sense of these things when, in some ways, in some ways, coming from a tradition that would be critical of attaching, you might say, too much grace to a ritual, and yet also at the same time coming from a, a tradition that is very traditional and that certainly has like really significant rituals. But this idea would be basically that um, if you are taking communion, then you are participating in the grace that Christ has given to humanity. If you are baptized, then you are participating in the grace of God. And this view would say these things are not just um, they're not just signs that you can show the world how much God has done for you or something like that, so you can demonstrate your salvation to the world. But there is something real that you experience and that you take part in when you
Mhm.
engage in the ritual.
Yeah.
So I don't know then, David, if you wanted to jump in and make a few comments there at this stage.
No, go ahead and keep going for now.
Okay, so some you might find like a Catholic way of describing, and um, this is a sort of summary way. Grace comes from the work that's performed if the priest is sanctifying the elements of the Eucharist and then is giving those to the people in the congregation. Then the work that he's doing there, the ritual that he's doing, that's something that um, that like grace is present in the work of the priest there, and the people can receive it from the hands of the priest. So you have kind of this idea that like God has put grace into this act, and in participating it, then you get to experience that grace. And I wonder how you'd respond to some of that language. I'm
I think that's a so to me that sounds like a kind of like a Protestant attempt to define an Orthodox understanding of these things. I'm not going to speak for Catholicism whether or not that's accurate to
Okay.
Catholicism
So
or not.
I'm trying to define a Catholic way of saying
Okay,
this, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job. I'm not trying to like present a caricature or something,
right. No,
but
no, I'm not accusing you of that. I'm just
right,
like
right, right.
thinking,
Well,
I
I could be
in terms of
presenting a caricature, but that's not.
yeah,
I'm
in
not
terms
trying
of
to attack the idea
no,
or
I
promote
just
either
my
one.
my point being is that in terms of orthodoxy, that's not really a great way to say it.
Yeah,
I mean, like it's getting towards the ideas, and I'm like I said, I'm not going to speak for Catholicism because I don't know. Like I guess I'm a little bit confused as to how that actually works in Catholicism and Roman Catholicism.
yeah.
So I don't want to say something that's inaccurate and like mischaracterize Roman Catholic theology on this point.
Okay.
But how was it you said that again? That like
Well,
God is
grace comes from the work performed, which would be like ex opere operato,
yeah,
which
right.
from Aquinas, that would be a
Yes.
English
And
version of
I
his language.
so yeah, that's useful for you to kind of rephrase it that way because I would say orthodox like as orthodox like we don't really believe like we don't believe ex operato or so on. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, opere operato.
Yeah, right, right. So we don't that's not an accurate way of phrasing the orthodox belief.
Hmm. Okay, then phrase your belief.
So that would be I would think of that as like scholastic theology, which is something that, we're opposed to in orthodoxy, that kind of way, like the thing itself, like saying that, the thing itself, it works through the thing itself.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think about what is a good kind of succinct way of phrasing what we as Orthodox believe that demonstrates the contrast. But like I would see it as it's not the thing itself that is ever operating to like and that yeah it's not the thing itself that's operating and grace is working through this thing but rather like the thing it's I don't know I'm having a hard time summarizing what I'm trying to say here. Kind of bear with me here a little bit as I try to wrap this all up in my mind. But
Yeah.
so when
Yeah, and
I hear
again, I apologize if I've presented a little bit of a caricature, because that's not what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to like find other people that have summarized this and summarize it in that same way. But but to me, this does feel like a very sort of mechanical sort of operation.
yes, right, and that's what we would object to as Orthodox, and I think to be fair, some Catholics would object to that way of looking at it as well.
Hmm.
But certainly, like this ex operato mentality is something that is objectionable to like an orthodox understanding of sacramentality. That really, what's more important for us as Orthodox is this idea of participation rather than like this mechanical ritual through which God's grace operates. And so, I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to phrase the distinction there. Um,
Let's see. I don't know if this is helpful, but if um, just for like a totally unrelated metaphor, like if I am playing in a baseball game, then you could say like there's a kind of grace that comes to me because I'm participating,
yeah,
and it's not it I- like the grace coming from the thing like this thing has been, I don't know, like it's not it's not like something special that's been put into this baseball game that like then I get to draw something out of.
yeah,
It's it's the fact of participation. It's the fact of
right,
like getting up and doing the thing with my body. Like that's what's giving me the joy and giving me this deep sense of the goodness of life. And so I don't know if that helps to bridge a little bit, but if you're because I'm kind of interested in the answer to the like where does grace come or how does it come through, how does it come through the sacraments? If you're participating like um I mean in some way this maybe is too touchy feely of language, but you know yourself and you feel yourself to be participating in what is ultimately good.
yeah. So, I think an important way of understanding this from an Orthodox perspective is that what's going on with the church, with the life of the church, with the sacraments and all of these things is we have what we'll refer to as like the normative means of salvation, which is that like God has established these things not as like here's like a mechanical thing that you can do to like maintain this status of grace by participating in these things that it's almost like I don't know, like this magic ritual, um or like like participating in these things that it's just the participation in them affects God's grace to you and all of this. But rather it's that God has established these things so that we as humans in need of salvation, in need of healing, in need of God's grace, in need of God's work in our lives, have a means that we can see, that we can recognize, and that we can approach, that we can understand through which God accomplishes these things. Um, God has established these things because it's good for him to have done so. And what I'm getting at there is just this idea that um I don't know, the important point I'm wanting to point to is just this idea of the normative means of salvation, and that's central to our understanding of the sacrament. And so, like, I don't know, baptism would be a good example of that. That we would look at baptism as functioning the way it does because Christ entered the waters of baptism, when he was baptized by John, and then he also, you know, instituted Christian baptism after his resurrection, showing like, here's the thing that I have done. And now I give you this means that you can approach me, you can approach what I've done and participate in it. And so, there again, like this participatory nature of the sacrament comes centrally into focus. And the same thing is kind of happening also with the Eucharist, where you have this Eucharist that's established by Christ as a means of us participating in the sacrificial action that he has accomplished. I don't know. Am I making sense? Am I like I am I and I'm am I communicating this in a way that I don't know if
Yeah,
like
I think somewhat. I mean, I'm going to go back to that question that came up earlier about what does grace mean, and again, we're postponing giving a definition of what grace means because it does mean multiple things. And one thing that it means is grace. Grace is um, that gift of God that can bring about positive transformation in your soul.
yeah,
And if you look at something like baptism and you ask the question, can baptism bring about positive transformation in someone's soul? Can it change somebody's identity to make them into I mean more aligned with God's vision of who they should be?
yeah.
Um, I mean, I think with something like baptism, I think actually it's undeniable that baptism has the power to like permanently change somebody's identity. When it comes to something like participating in the sacrament,
Well,
uh,
you say it's undeniable, but then we have somebody in the comment section denying it.
well, I mean, could be, but like um, this. So I mean, I think of baptism very much in terms of initiation ritual, like and that's a little different probably than the Orthodox take on it, but the
Well,
initiation
yes
ritual.
and no,
What's that?
because baptism is certainly an initiation ritual, but that's just insufficient to completely encapsulate it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not trying to, but the initiation ritual
Okay.
does have more to do with somebody's like transition into adulthood. But the initiation ritual is going to exist in every culture all over the world, historically speaking, because it actually does have power to transform people.
Mhm.
It does have, and like a story has the power to transform people, and certainly a ritual that's enacting a story, and like now you are participating in the thing, certainly has power to transform people. And in
Yeah.
that way, that's why I say like it's undeniable baptism has power to transform people.
Well,
And
okay, but the power that baptism has to transform people is even more fundamental than that, because everything that you're describing is like a very dim shadow of what occurs in baptism. Because fundamentally, in like you'll find this, for example, in Saint Irenaeus. So like this is like right away in Christianity that you have this theology, which I mean, like I also argue it's in the New Testament, where but maybe you're just not used to realizing this is what the New Testament is teaching. But what's fundamentally what's going on here, and this is important for our discussion about grace. So this isn't too much of a digression, but like what's really really central for us to understand in baptism is that what happens with the fall is that the human nature is, we're like, I don't want to say that the human nature is fallen because that's not what any of the fathers have to say. The human nature is what is created in God's image. But what happens is like our mode, our expression, like the fathers will use the Greek word tropos of the human nature is flawed. So it's like the analogy I like to use, and I mean Saint Irenaeus uses a similar analogy. Actually, I think he uses the same analogy, which it's like you have a painting, like a master has painted like this masterpiece of a painting, and then his students like copy the painting, and what we have are like bad copies of the painting. And Saint Irenaeus uses this language. He says Christ recapitulates our human nature. And so that's like, do you continue with the analogy of the painting? It's like the master sees what we've done with his masterpiece and is like, oh no, 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 you've messed this all up. And what you're painting is ugly and doesn't reflect the masterpiece that I've created at all. And so he represents the masterpiece to us. Um, and so fundamentally, what's happening in baptism? This is really, really important when you're talking about the transformation of the person. Is that it says we put away the old man according to the flesh, and we put on the new man according to Christ. That's New Testament language. That's not some kind of strange Orthodox addition. Is that we're restored to the human nature. We're restored to the image of God. So there is this super fundamental transformation of me as a person that occurs because of the grace that operates through holy baptism. And this is what the New Testament teaches.
Yeah. So again, I think like, um, however, there are different ways we could try to define this, and I don't want to be like too dismissive of what you're saying in responding to this, but like either way, you look at baptism as something like this does have power to bring about transformation in the state of a person. This
Right.
like can change the definition of a person's life, and therefore grace, like you participate in the grace of God through it. If the transformation is positive and godly,
Yeah.
then grace is built into the ritual in that way.
Yeah. And
And
I'm just taking that a step
yeah,
forward,
yeah, right.
and arguing from a realist position, which is that like no, there's something real actually happening here. There's something like ontologically significant going on here. In contrast to our comment here, which is just Platonic metaphysics, I'll just throw this up here. It's like this is just straight up Platonism. Like this is not Christianity. The idea that God is spiritual, and you can't see him, you can't feel him, or maybe you can feel like like I appreciate the desire and everything, but just want to point out that that is not, I don't know, that's not that's not Christianity. That's Platonism.
Well, I don't know. I mean, as it said, I think you're trying to like read between the lines in the comment a little bit, because I mean, like, um, certainly God is spirit, and no one has seen him at any time.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know
But
that
God took on flesh as the
what's
man
that?
Jesus
Well, yeah,
Christ,
yeah, yeah, but um,
and we can in fact see him.
um,
Like I see him every Sunday
yeah.
in the Eucharist.
Um, yeah, I think although like you're doing a little bit of equivocation with the comment and the
Well,
use of the word
I
see
mean,
there. I know that,
I'm just going off of what, his responses to our discussion of like this ontological significance of baptism. And this
yeah,
is a logical extension of what he was saying. And just like no, like this your objection here really does seem to be arising from much more of a Platonic position than a Christian one. Just
the
because, and part of the reason why I'm willing to make that stretch is because that's what's going on in like modern expressions of Protestantism in general, is that this kind of Platonic metaphysics has snuck in and really colored the way that we interpret these things. And that's significant for our discussion here about grace as well.
as far as significance of the ritual for the early church, then I mean, baptism is an extremely important practice for early Christians. The Eucharist is an extremely important practice that every time you meet together with other Christians, then like you're having communion with one another.
You're right.
And that's like for a lot of modern Christians, that seems like it's over the top. Like why every
Right.
single week? And my church does it every week, and that for me was like took a lot of getting used to.
Yeah.
And partly because in our tradition, we communion is a very rare thing, but it's treated as like the pinnacle of the year, in a sense, like you spend weeks preparing for communion. So it was like it was treated as the most important thing that the church does, basically, but it was done rarely. But again, for the early Christians, you participate in this ritual as much as you possibly can. And so it does suggest there is a real significance to that ritual for the early Christians, more so than for most modern Christians.
Hmm.
And the ritual then is like this is a physical act. This is something that you do with your body.
Right.
And yet, again, it's so important that you're going to do it every time you get together. This is way more important than like hearing a good sermon.
Right.
Then I wanted to kind of connect to this. Of course, we could talk a little more on the Eucharist if we want to, but I think in a similar, I would say similar things to what I said about baptism, like that partaking of communion. If you participate with your whole spirit, you might say, like if you're actually participating in the thing and not just um like eating a piece of bread, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like if you're engaged in this thing, then I think certainly it also has power um to heal your soul and to change it into something better.
Well, I mean, in even there, like I'm gonna go even further than I think you're comfortable going on that. And like I'm gonna say that like the Eucharist is what it is, regardless of my personal approach to it. And be like I'm going to reject any kind of subjectivity in Christianity.
Well, but I mean, like if you're in the wrong spiritual state, then you're eating and drinking your way to damnation. Like,
Yes, right. Then that's because it is what it is.
but that would mean like in order for it to be the positive thing that it could be, to work that like positive transformative influence on me, then like I have to be in the right state.
Yes, but that doesn't change like the essence of what the thing itself is. Like it's not like that. I don't know that we're actually disagreeing with each other here. I'm just clarifying that the Eucharist is the Eucharist, and my approaching it unprepared and in the wrong way doesn't change the quality of what it is, and that's why it is to my damnation. Because
Hmm.
it is the flesh and blood of Christ. And just like this idea of that which is unclean not being able to come into the presence of that which is holy.
Okay, I did want to shift a little bit to just kind of include some of the work that you do in this discussion right here and kind of connect it to the sacraments or to ritual. Um, because, well, I guess I'll just leave it to you to say like what's the role of iconography in this discussion of the means of grace coming to people.
um I don't know, that's quite a complicated question.
Yeah.
But it's a good question. So I mean there is, I don't know, I'm trying to I'm trying to think of how to phrase it that doesn't sound like I'm doing the thing that I just said not to do, which is make things subjective.
Hmm.
But it is, I don't know, it is like the icon is the image of something holy. And I don't know, it's important to qualify that with an understanding of holiness. Like, and the best way I know how to explain this is what like the illustration that I always do is in the Divine Liturgy in the Orthodox Church. We will say at one point that the holy things are for the holy. Like this is talking about the Eucharist. The holy things are for the holy. And then we respond to that: one is holy, one is Lord, Jesus Christ, to the glory of God the Father. Um, and what we are teaching there in the Eucharist, what we're teaching there in the liturgy, is this idea that we are holy because we are partakers of the divine life of Christ. Where like it is the holiness of God that is making us holy.
Hmm.
Like holiness is always an extension of God's holy. So like there again, like nobody is holy by their own merit. Nobody is saved by their own merit. Nobody is made a partaker or a participant in the grace of God by their own merits. It's only the merit of God that does this. And that's what I mean. I just think it's really important to qualify that for people when we're talking about, the icons of saints being depictions of holy things. And so like there's kind of like this hierarchical operation going on there that every saint is himself an icon of Christ. And so that means every icon is an icon of Christ. It's just an icon of an icon of Christ, if you understand what I'm saying there. And so there really is this important theology in, in an Orthodox understanding of icons, that God's grace does operate through things. And so there again, the icon is not holy subjectively because of the attitude that I have when I look at it or what I think it is. It is holy because it is an image of something holy. And so God's grace operates through that. Because what I don't know, what's really important for understanding this idea in orthodoxy is this idea that heaven is invading earth. And so that's why an icon is holy, because it's us taking something of this earth, of this fallen earth, and imprinting upon it the image of something holy. And so this is like heaven invading earth. That's part of why we call them windows to heaven. So it's like heaven invading earth, something of heaven being painted onto or printed onto something of the earth. And so it's like this bit of holiness invading and filling our space and filling our lives, and God operating in our lives through that, but also in the whole world through that. Like the same idea is at work when we say, like, we want to build beautiful churches everywhere and perform the Eucharist, like perform the liturgy everywhere. Like this
Hmm.
idea of God's grace operating through those things and sanctifying and saving the world.
Yeah, and as far as the power of holy things to do that because they're holy, regardless of your well, like what you subjectively bring to the table.
Yeah.
Like if you build a beautiful church, then there's a beautiful building sitting on that street corner or whatever, and it's there, like in a sense, like whether you're honoring it or not, or whether you're consciously thinking about it or not, it is still it is still making the place better.
Yeah.
I mean, like for just to go for a less religious example of this, like if you're walking in a neighborhood with no trees and you're walking with a neighborhood with a bunch of trees, you don't have to be aware of the trees. You don't have to be thinking of them. You will be like more calm and more relaxed. So
Yeah.
like you will experience greater peace and greater joy, like because you're in the presence of these trees. Again, it doesn't matter what you're bringing to the table. You will experience those benefits from it.
Yeah.
And in that same way, like when you're in the presence of the beautiful church building, in a sense, it doesn't matter if your heart is like deeply connected to it or not. You are still like in the presence of something that's beautiful, and it still has
Right.
an effect. And so that can kind of like tie back to some of the things that you were saying in response to like what I'd said about like partaking of the sacrament or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you're still in the presence of something that's holy, and actually you're still like participating in it and engaging in it with your body. um
Yeah. And I just think it's important, like, I am an Orthodox Christian, and you obviously are not. Um, Orthodox Christianity drives this incarnational theology, I think, a lot further than you personally do at this point. And I mean that I leads to some interesting discussions. So like I'm not like criticizing you for that. And then like I think have a much more of a realist philosophy than I think that you do. Um, I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
um not especially, but I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think in terms of like when it comes to, and I maybe this isn't exactly what you mean, but when it comes to theological questions, like I'm very much interested um in a sense, like a person could be very interested in like, okay, well, what does the Bible say on this issue, and like whatever it says, that's the truth that I'm going to go with. And for me, like I do need to see, okay, well, here's what the Bible says about it, but what is the connection between this and what a person actually experiences?
Yeah, right.
And like
Yeah,
if you can't make that connection, then like there's no point in having this as a part of your theology.
right. But I think like I'm driving when I'm speaking of realist philosophy, I'm thinking more of like this idea that what we are describing here aren't necessarily like philosophical and psychological and theoretical concepts or like useful analogies and illustrations, but rather we're describing ontological realities. And so like I like the the question that we were talking about earlier with the Eucharist, where I was saying like the Eucharist is what it is, regardless of our interaction with it. Like that would be a classic example of realist philosophy at work. Like it really is what it is.
Hmm.
And it is not something else. It can't be anything else. Although there was a story I heard one time of somebody in an Orthodox church when they were serving the Eucharist, and there was this little girl there that like while the people were coming forward and partaking, like every now and then she would just laugh for no reason, no apparent reason. And somebody asked her afterwards, "It's like, why were you laughing when this person or this person went forward?" And it's like, didn't you see the bird that was coming down? And every time this or that person went to take the Eucharist, to take the gifts off of the spoon, the bird would come down, swoop down, and take it before they could get it. And so like it was interpreted as like this was like God's grace preventing unworthy people from partaking of the holy things.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I think in terms of that, like I will try to not. I mean, sorry, were you finished with the story?
yeah,
Okay. I would tend to, when you say like it is what it is, regardless, there's you might have a little bit stronger position on that than I would. Like I would try to filter that through like um I mean, I guess you could just say like symbolic thinking or like a kind of symbolic reasoning that says, well, yes, it is what it is. And if you put it in the wrong context, or if you try to interpret it differently, like the different interpretation won't work.
all right.
If you try to put it in the different context, then it's like um, um, then it like it could only be a mockery, or like it can't become something else.
Yeah,
It can't fit in a different context because it means this thing.
right.
So in that sense, I mean, I guess I would still entertain the idea, like, well, that could be a culturally determined um, interpretation of a symbol or something like that. That was I wouldn't be able to totally exclude that thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably often an ability there for you to have like more of a both and understanding. Um, I think there's probably some areas where those concepts are mutually exclusive,
Hmm.
but largely they're not.
Well, no, I mean they wouldn't have to be because um, well, you could say like if something is ordained of God, then it would also be what the culture. I mean, like
Yeah.
um, that would be in some ways like understood by a culture.
Hmm.
But anyways, we're getting a little off topic. We've been on this about an hour, so I'd like to rip through some of these others if,
Right.
if that's okay.
Right.
Did you have anything
Yeah,
else
no,
there?
that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Faith as the means of grace. Um, we're justified by faith alone, by grace that comes through faith and not of works. Works don't cause our salvation. No work salvation's not works based. Like these would be phrases you would hear a lot. And if somebody mentions, we'll talk about we'll talk a little bit more about works in just a minute. But if somebody talks about like work, participating in the will of God as being something that allows you to experience God's grace in a deeper way, then somebody might be worried like, oh, this sounds like works based salvation that you're talking about here. Rituals are a sign of grace; they don't confer grace. Again, like grace comes to us through faith, and usually the idea will be that faith itself is something that was grace that was given to us. But again, the grace of God comes through faith.
Mhm. Um, let's see. I want to say once again, I agree,
Yeah,
but there with again with a cat with a caveat.
and you're getting distracted trying to translate the comments here. I think what's your
No, actually, I'm looking up the Nicene Creed in Greek.
oh, okay. Okay, I can tell you were staring at your screen there. Um, Okay, so sorry, what is it that you agree with then when you say that?
that we are saved by our faith, like we are saved by grace through faith.
Yeah,
Obviously, I agree with that because St. Paul said it.
yeah,
Um, but even like there's a sense in which you can kind of say faith alone that I, as an Orthodox Christian, can agree with. It's just you're misdefining faith when you're using it in like this Lutheran sense.
mm-hmm,
And that's why I was looking up the Nicene Creed. You know, like it's pistevomen es ena theon, so on and so on. But pistevomen is, you know, I believe, and like the Greek word pistis or pisteo, you know, that's faith or believe. Like that's how it's translated in the Bible. I mean, like in most English translations, this is translated as faith or to believe. But like that's not a great translation in terms of modern English, what faith has come to mean in modern English. And, you know, like you shared this, I don't know, I almost was going to prepare this, look it up again. Like you shared like this etymology of like the word believe and it's related etymologically to the word love and all of these other
mm-hmm,
things.
yeah.
Um, which I thought was wonderful. I thought was fantastic. I don't know if you remember all that off the top of your head.
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Um,
But I mean, I remember making that connection, but
yeah. But just the idea that faith, I don't know, it's like it's reduced to something like believing what God like like accepting the theoretical proposition of something and consenting to it logically and rationally. And that's
mm-hmm,
what say which is just like when you actually sit back and define these things, I think you realize how ridiculous it actually is.
yeah, right,
But you know, that's not what faith means in the Bible. Faith is more like, you know, um it's more of an active principle, really. And so I guess I should explain why I can agree with it, because me having faith in God means that I do the things that God has set before me to do,
mm-hmm, yeah,
that I act according to what He has set out for me.
right.
Like that is faith.
Right, and
And
it would be very easy to just change the language only slightly and to say that that would mean being faithful to God,
yes,
would
and
be doing
it is
those things, yeah.
significantly more important for me to do the things that God has given me to do than to understand those things.
Mhm,
And this is a huge, huge mistake that we've made in the modern world and in modern Christianity. It's like this post enlightenment think mentality that we've all adopted, that you know our understanding of things is what's the most important. Our ability to, you know, wrap our minds around them, to approach them by logic and reason, and to consent rationally and logically, like this is what matters. Like I know this problem is already well enforced in the late Middle Ages, but it's just like it's so dominant in our thinking today in everything. You know, like I used
mhm,
to be this way. Like I had a really, really hard time when I was younger, like being asked to do something that I didn't understand. It's like I gotta understand this thing or I can't do it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
well,
right,
no, like that's actually bad.
mhm,
You know, if I am an employee being asked to do something and I first have to figure out why I should be doing this thing, I'm a bad employee. And the
yeah,
same
right,
thing is true for a
yeah,
Christian. If I'm a Christian and God has asked me to do something and my answer is okay, but I need to understand it first, then I am a bad Christian. That is not faith. That is, I don't know, that's hubris and pride.
mhm,
It's like this, I don't know, this kind of intellectual arrogance, this kind of, I don't know, it's really this kind of satanic pride where we're trying to elevate ourselves and place ourselves on the same level as the supreme God.
yeah, right,
Um, so anyway, that's, I don't know, my kind of little diatribe there. Like faith doesn't mean what a lot of people have reduced it to mean.
yeah,
Yeah, and
right,
it's just, I don't know, I just really wanted to stress that point, that it is far, far more far, far more important to have Christians with the kind of simple faith that God asked them to do something, and so they simply do it.
yeah, right. Um, there's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die.
Yeah.
which is a line from Tennyson, "The Charge of the Light Brigade." But he's talking about soldiers who followed a stupid order, an order that had an error involved and got a
Yeah.
lot of the people killed. And the poet is celebrating these people because they were good soldiers, because they didn't think they were the boss, you know.
Well, it's like you
And
have these
you say you're a bad employee, you know, so my mind goes right away to like, well, I mean, if you're in the army, it's even worse. If you have to
yeah.
understand the thing before you do it, then you lose the war.
Yeah, and it's like you have these incredible stories in the sayings of the Desert Fathers of like young monks who were under the obedience of a bad elder who was like an abusive person or you know some kind of horrible vile sinful person, and they
Hmm.
just humbly and quietly obeyed the like oftentimes extreme things that were asked of them, and
Which is
sometimes
what Peter is saying over and over again to do.
yeah, right, but like some like to some point like even to their death, just obeying what was asked of them because this is what they agreed to. It's like
Hmm.
I agreed to put myself in obedience, and that means like to my own death. And because they did that, then like they are saints that then save the souls of the elder who abused them and like lead them to repentance. And so but the idea there is just that this quiet simple obedience saves us and it saves the world, especially if we have like I don't know, you have this idea repeatedly like in Jesus parables for example where if we can we can see how I don't know, I was thinking of like the unjust judge and the widow begging him. I know that's illustrating a kind of a different point, but just the point I was trying to bring out from that is just this idea that we can see how I don't know how God is better than our unjust rulers. And so if we can have this kind of obedience to the unjust, how much more so can we have this kind of obedient to the just God? I don't know. I feel like I made that point very poorly, but I was just trying to say it as it was formulating in my mind.
Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and jump into works then, because we don't want to spend too much time on this. We're over an hour already. I've
Yeah.
got this is the last major category, and then I had a couple other minor things. We might talk a little bit more about the definition of grace now at some point as well. But maybe we can cover the things we wanted to say when we get into works here, which we're already sort of talking about, because when we say you're saved by faith, then we would both agree that in our modern world, we define faith in this very intellectual way. If faith is an intellectual act and it's rooted in logic and reason, then it's a work anyways.
Hmm. Right. Well, that's a
And
good point. Like, you and I have made that point a lot of times in our discussion going back years.
mhm,
How like this is the logical flaw in sola fide is it doesn't actually get rid of works. It just reduces the number of necessary works to one,
yeah, yeah, right, right,
which doesn't actually solve the problem it is purporting to solve. It ends up being the solution. Like it ends up being no solution
right,
at all.
right, yeah, yeah. And so instead, if faith is faithfulness, then it's actually not a work, but it's a like a state of being, or a state of your soul that does connect to works.
Uh-huh. And it's also a response.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, whereas like the intellectual act is not really a response in the same way.
Well, I'll just throw this out there. It's just it's like I think like the intellectual, like the reduction of it to something intellectual is like a way, I don't know, a way for people to try to solve a kind of anxiety that they feel,
Hmm.
but it doesn't actually accomplish it.
Yeah. You could also say it's um, meaningless to the poor.
Yeah,
And so the more Christianity becomes an intellectual exercise, the less that it is a doctor to the sick.
right.
Okay. Anyways, on to works officially though. So instead of saying that, because most people are not going to like teach with the language that says works, doing the work of God brings grace. I don't know. You could say that brings grace into your life or allows you to more fully participate in God's grace. But instead of just calling this works, I'm perfectly happy to go with the kind of language that you were using earlier about synergy,
Hmm.
participating in the energies of God. And I mean, I guess I should just ask you to kind of define really briefly what that would mean.
Um,
Oh,
Let me
this
look something.
before you even define, I will say like this might sound like where in the world is this is this coming from? But actually, Paul is talking about this constantly. And I mean, I don't know, it may be hard to find an English Bible that uses the word synergy, or even uses the word energies of God, in that way. But again, like this is actually all over Paul. This is the language that he uses.
Oh, it is. So the Orthodox, yeah, this I'm looking up the verse right now. Um, but the word synergy is used. So James 2:22, he says, "You see that faith was working together." Says regarding Abraham, you see that faith was working together with his works, and that word working together is synergia.
Hmm.
So it's like we didn't like pull this term out of nowhere. We got it from St. Paul, or no, we got it from St. James.
Yeah.
This is the way that James describes grace as working, in the example here being with Abraham, like synergistically with his works.
Hmm. Yeah, but again, like energies of God. I mean, this is um that is in Paul all over the place, like him talking about the energy of God. So energies, God's energies sounds like an Orthodox theological term or something like that,
Yeah.
but that's just because they were using the Greek Bible. That's why
Yeah,
that's why it
right. And
sounds like
then
an Orthodox term.
St. Paul also describes himself and his readers in 2 Corinthians 6:1 as fellow workers with God, and the fellow workers there also being a noun derived from the term synergy.
Hmm.
So my point is like there's this, like you said, this is actually all over the writings of the New Testament, this idea of synergy.
Yeah,
And
and
then
of energy as well. Yeah,
yeah, and then synergy again, like this is just a it's just how in Greek you say the idea of working together with something.
right.
And so that's what we mean when we say there's a synergistic operation of the grace of God with our works. It's like our, like James says, that our works work together with God's grace.
Hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, this seems like a really nice piece of theology that would be nice to include in the
Right.
English speaking world.
Yeah.
Again, that we're working together with the grace of God,
Yeah.
with His grace, and that's the reason I repeat that phrase is because I don't mean that like because we have it now we're able to work, but it's like no, that grace itself is the thing that we are cooperating with.
Yeah. Right. So he says that full verse from James 2:22 is, you see that faith was working together there against synergia with his works, and by works was faith made perfect.
Yeah.
So I thought like that
Yeah, that's
illustrates
good.
pretty.
That's like the faith without works is dead is like very easy to refer to. And when we had a comment recently from Christopher Adams, and then he didn't mention the specific verse, he just says St. James speaks about this. And my mind there goes right away to faith without works is dead. But then you're saying what my faith is made perfect in that work with God.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, yeah, another like really striking relationship that James makes between faith and works.
Yeah, right. And like in contrast, we have our like our comments in here speaking of this idea of monergism, like one energy, one work working in our lives. And that's kind of, I don't know, kind of the idea you were describing earlier, John, is monergism. this, this unilateral action of God, like they this I don't know, like this invasive grace of God. It's only the energy of God, only the work of God entering into us and saving, and there's like nothing of our own to do. That
Yeah, right.
monergism.
Yeah. Yeah, but really the Christian vision is like there is something for you to do. There is you become one with that energy of God.
Well, yes, and it's because God is love,
Yeah.
and monergism would not be like the action of a loving God.
Mhm. Or there'd be no place for you to participate, like to be
Right.
one with that thing.
I mean, then we would just be, I don't know, we wouldn't be humans.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I don't think we should talk too much about this, even though I mean, in some ways, I feel like this is the second part of the conversation. I wanted to hit the sacramental thing especially, but then come around to works here. We sort of covered a little by when we were talking about faith already, and then I think we've just at least defined the idea here. Um, I don't know if there's anything else in particular you wanted to say about works here.
They're good and you should do them.
Yeah, I mean that is valuable to say.
Yes.
um,
And they're necessary, and so you need to do them.
yeah, right.
I mean, like there's important caveats to throw out. So like the counter argument that people will often throw out against the necessity of baptism is like, what about the thief on the cross? And the answer to that is like, God can save whoever he wants to save. That doesn't mean that you are exempted from the works that he has given you to do,
Hmm.
because you're not the thief on the cross. Like you're not in this like this extreme position where this extraordinary grace of God is extended in order to save you. I mean, you
Yeah.
could be. Like it's a very real possibility. You could find yourself in a situation like that, and God's grace is sufficient to save you. But that's not what we're talking about here. Like we don't base the rules on the exceptions
Hmm.
and on the
Yeah.
extreme fringe cases.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You wouldn't probably want to use the thief on a cross to say like, see, it's fine if I just spend my whole life as a thief and then convert on my deathbed. You know.
Yeah, right. Um, yes, I don't know. So that's what I wanted to say about works is you should
Yeah. You know.
probably
I
do
mean,
them.
we can kind of come to this like anti-works mentality because we want to be so insistent that our salvation isn't dependent on works and we don't think that we're earning our salvation, so like any reference to any kind of work we just become kind of allergic to.
Yeah.
Although I don't know how you really become allergic to the idea of like participating in the work of God really. I think
Why you would
also
even want it. Like, I
well,
I I
right,
really
right,
don't
yeah,
understand, like, why do you even want this theology?
yeah.
I mean, I know you can argue it doesn't matter if I want it, like, what's true is what's true, and, like, that's all well and good. But still, I feel like it's a valid point to just raise. It's like, what's even the appeal of this theology?
Well, that is a criticism because if it's like, you know, I can easily imagine a better God, the better God would be one that like I can participate in his goodness and in his love and in his work. And if it's like that easy for me to imagine a better God, then then
Yeah.
it does make that conception sound like it's got to be missing something.
Yes, and, like, this synergistic idea of the operation of God's grace is just, I don't know, it's something that if you actually believe it, it's wonderful. Like, it's so much better than, I don't know, than the alternatives. And, like, I don't
You know,
know, it really does, like, really drive this point home in my mind that God is a God who loves me, and
mhm,
what he does, like, this love is what defines the way in which he interacts with his creation. And in contrast to that, the other option that you have is that God is a wrathful God who is judging us and is wroth, he's angry with us because we're violating his rules all the time. Like that's the alternative. And I know you might think that's, you say like, wow, that's reductive. Um, like maybe it is, but I don't know. I don't see that if you're being consistent with your philosophy and theology that there's actually a middle ground there.
Yeah, I would also say I was starting to say some people become theologically allergic to works, and when when I was at Taylor University, I kind of had like a sort of a different feeling of like I got really tired of people trying to guilt trip you into doing good works all the time.
Yeah.
If you're not involved in this particular campus ministry or you're not involved in some campus ministry thing, then like especially if you were male, because they always wanted more men involved in these things. And so if you're a man and you're not involved in this stuff, then you are like the scum of the earth or something. Like they're just really trying to use guilt in order to motivate people. And I think if you have this again like vision of um, in doing the work of God, you're participating in His love.
Yeah.
Like if you have that vision, then you don't like guilt is not your motivation. You got
Yes,
something way better than that.
it's like the scripture says that we love one another because he first loved us.
Hmm.
And so, like, there is something that is true about what Calvinist type Protestants will try to say, or what sola fide type Protestants will say about what it is that good works are, as something that like naturally flows out of faith and out of the grace of God that fills your life. But like, that's not an untrue statement either. And, we would actually say something very similar as Orthodox Christians, that my good works are actually the work and the grace of the Holy. I work and grace and the Orthodox mind are the same thing, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, the work and the grace of the Holy Spirit operating in me, that's where my good works come from. So they're like at the end of the day, they're not my good works. They're God's good works. And I am aligning myself with the character and the nature of God. And, that's like getting back at the synergistic operation of grace. This is me aligning myself with the nature, the goodness of God, and becoming more like God. And then God's grace increasingly working through me. And this is saving me. And it's God that's saving me, not me saving myself, because I can't save myself.
Um, I
Like
want to.
this
I
is
want
what
to.
makes
I
us
want to. Sorry. Go ahead.
different. I said this is what sets us apart from like the Muslims or the Buddhists who have like a religion of saving themselves.
Yeah, I want to come back to what you said about grace and work are the same thing. Although I also see another comment from Christopher Adams there, quoting C.S. Lewis: "We must forgive the inexcusable in others because God forgives the inexcusable in us." And this is calling to mind the Lord's Prayer, of course.
Yeah.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And in that, there's also kind of this indication of participation that like the the prayer is asking for it seems like asking for forgiveness in the measure to which I give forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so like if I'm going to enjoy this grace of God, then I should be forgiving other people.
Hmm.
But like I said, I wanted to come back to your statement. You said grace and works are really the same thing. And I think in James you can see that like faith and works are really the same thing.
Yeah.
Or again, like one of them is driving the other thing, and like they're totally inseparable. I mean, technically, you could say they have different definitions. They're not precisely the same thing, but
Yeah.
like
They're not
you don't have
precisely
one.
the same thing, but it's like really hard to distinguish where one ends and the other begins.
Yeah, right. And so then just kind of expand a little bit on that. Grace and works are the same.
Um, I don't know. They're the same thing. So
Okay.
grace, from like a patristic point of view, grace would be like the operation of God, God working in things. So when we're speaking of grace, so in contrast to this, so like what I would have been used to hearing before I was Orthodox is, people like really trying to struggle to define what grace is, and especially in their way of understanding things to distinguish grace and mercy. Um, and so, you'd have a definition of like mercy is God not giving you what you deserve for the bad things that you have done, and grace is God giving you good things that you don't deserve. So it's like they're a similar concept.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea being that, God basically being good to you and you don't deserve for God to be good to you. So again, like there's like this really guilty sense of like this real firm sense of guilt as driving
Yeah,
as
right.
the central thing here.
Yeah.
And so again, this is like the definition of grace I would have been used to, but in contrast to that, in orthodoxy we say grace is God working. Grace is like this is just a word used to describe the action and the work of God.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so
Yeah,
there
that is good.
is,
I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, largely grace and energy, which is just energy is just the Greek word for work. It's energeia,
Mm-hmm.
like to work in something. So like when we in Orthodox theology or in patristic theology are using the word energy, we are talking about the internal working of something, like God working in something. So God's energies is describing um like the things that God does, basically.
Yeah.
Um and so in for example, the theology of Saint Gregory Palamas, who's my patron saint, grace and energy, grace and the energies of God are treated as if they are synonymous, because
Mm-hmm.
I would say that they are. So that's, I don't know, that's my way of answering like how do I define grace? Grace
Yeah.
is the working of God. And so that's why it is that as Orthodox we say the grace of God operates in the sacraments. Because what we're saying there is that God is working in these things.
Yeah. And of course, you pointed to sacraments in particular, but this does extend to everything. Everything that has existence has its existence by the grace of God.
Yeah.
And in that sense, there's the energy of God, that's the work of God that's present in everything there
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
When you were talking about when you look at the icon, then every saint is an icon of Christ.
Right.
And I mean, there's sort of this sense of like and I don't sometimes people say this in order to like flatten out and make the holy things not exist anymore, but there's an extent to which which everything that has existence is the icon of God and has the
Yeah.
energy of God present in it.
Well, and yeah, and you have that idea. Um, this the idea of like contemplating the heavens and contemplating nature and
Hmm.
all of these things is
Right.
like it's a central theme in patristic theology. Going out and walking under the stars at night is an it is an act of prayer, and it's treated as such in the patristic literature. And so is like going out and walking in the forest or something like that, like
Hmm.
being in nature is there's a goodness to that.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I think I'll cut short. I did have this other list where I mentioned a whole bunch of other things: prayer, scripture, worship, preaching, fellowship, spiritual discipline, as all like being potential things that we can participate. We can experience the grace of God by participating in those things. But I did want to just briefly mention the life of the church
Hmm.
and kind of highlight that one. And I don't know if I even want to comment on it because we've been going at this for a little while, but that still seems like a worthwhile thing to at least note that that was an item on the list here too.
Yeah.
if you have anything you really want to say about the life of the church, then go for it. But
I don't know. I think I already said a lot of the things that I wanted to
okay,
say about that.
okay, good. And then I don't know that we need to bother too much with. We kept saying we would define grace, and we've kind of been covering that a little bit as we go. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. And in this last discussion we had about grace and work being the same thing, and about grace as a like connecting that to participation in the work of God or
Yeah.
participation in the love of God, then I think that deals nicely with some of the it's a different way of saying it, but those are kind of the things that I wanted to get around to before the end. So I don't know
Yeah.
if there
Well,
was again anything else you wanted to add in terms of the definition of grace.
yes, if God is love, then participating in the energies of God and the grace of God is participating in the love and the goodness of God.
Hmm.
Like it's just a very simple concept.
Yeah, and we kind of start with this question of what are the things that impart grace to people or to believers,
Hmm.
and um, in a sense, that question is like, what are things that help to draw you deeper into union with God?
What's that? Sorry, I was looking at the comment over here. I was
I
distracted.
just I was saying that that question, what imparts grace to us, is like saying, rather than like, again, this isn't about earning something or meriting something. Like receiving grace from God isn't about that. You could say receiving grace from God just means existing in union, in greater union with God.
Yes. Well, so I tend to look at it this way. I think a lot of the debates on this coming from the sola fide Protestant criticism of an Orthodox position are kind of missing the mark on this whole conversation. And that really what's important for us to understand is that God wants what's best for us. And God was not required to do any of the things that he did. And so, for example, in the patristic theology, we will find it explicitly stated that God was not required to die on the cross to forgive us for our sins. That was never required of him. The reason he did this is because that was the best thing to do. But especially this idea of extending this, I don't know, this participatory sense of salvation to us. That what God wants for us is for us to live according to the pattern of what is good, the pattern that he, initially set out for us when he created us. And what God wants is for us to be united with him. And to that end, God has established certain things. He's given us a church. He's given us his saints. He's given us the sacraments. He's given us all of these incredible gifts and has told us, if you participate in these things, if you'll participate in the work that I have done, you know, through Christ, through the life of the church, and so on, then this is the way of salvation. This is the way towards being united with me. This is the way towards being who you truly are in Christ. And that's the proper way to look at these things. And like I said, I think so oftentimes these conversations are missing the mark because they're getting caught up in all of these abstract theological debates that are too many degrees removed from what it is actually important.
Okay, well, I think if it's okay with you, we can probably um, sign things off. I'm sure you've got a few closing words about little announcements and things like that. But yeah, I think this was a nice conversation, and for me, that grace, the grace of God and the work of God being the same thing. Like
Yeah.
that's that's the thing I will be carrying forward for a little
Yeah.
while out of this conversation.
Um, yeah, certainly. I don't know. I think that is a good place to wrap up. There's a lot of things we could say. We could address some of the comments here if we wanted to, but I think for tonight we're kind of running out of time. It's getting late here in Indiana. It's almost
Yeah, it is, and we do appreciate those. And I
yeah, we
tried to
do.
highlight a couple of things that Christopher had to say, and lots of good comments in there that we won't address all of them out loud, but we do appreciate it. We have been reading along, and
Yeah, they might have had a
good food
subtle
for thought.
impact on our conversation here. So
Yeah, right.
um, yeah, we appreciate all of you, our audience, whether you're watching this live or you're watching this after the fact, somewhere on the YouTubes. Um, Once again, please consider checking out the sponsor, which is me. You can find links to my iconography website in the description. I am an iconographer in the Orthodox Church, and I am open for commissions. That's how I make my living. And I'm also getting married in about 2 months, a little over 2 months. So I would definitely appreciate any more business. I guess people would like to throw my way. You can purchase hand painted icons, order custom icons. I also have some prints for sale. I need to update a few things. I have a few more prints I need to put up on there for people to buy as well. But I'm always happy to do that kind of work. I'm also working on creating some, I don't know, some less, I guess, less intimate art. That's I don't know, still like along the same lines, doing like illuminations. That's I just say that I'm doing like illuminations of like prayers, scripture verses, psalms, things like that. I don't really have anything with me to show on screen right now. Um, but just kind of doing some other things like that. I thought maybe there's people that want artwork, that want good things like that to display in their homes, but they maybe don't want something as intimate as an icon. um I'm doing things like that as well. And I don't know, John, what else do we want to talk about? We've been talking about doing some historical content, and I have been writing up some, I don't know, some drafts for that. That's something I like the idea of, like telling the story of the church, of the victorious church, rather than engaging in like all these polemics and apologetics against other traditions and their claims. And I think if we present the story of the church as it actually is, that's something I'd like to do. I'm kind of a, I don't know, I guess you could call me something of a history nerd too. So
Yeah,
that's that excites me very much.
you're a nerd when it comes to a lot of things, not just history.
I'm not sure how to take that actually.
Oh, I was trying to build up your credibility.
Oh, okay. So oh yeah, I forgot. Nerd is cool now.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's cool or not, but it does build credibility,
Right.
even if people don't like you.
I hope people like me.
Oh,
You guys
sure.
like me, right? You better comment in the comment section that you like me.
I think they probably all signed off.
Probably, but the people watching this after the fact, they can I don't know, stroke my ego.
Yeah, that's
But
just what we need.
we're also always interested in hearing what you guys would like to have us talk about. You know, we've been talking kind of behind the scenes as well as doing some more content, engaging some Anabaptist teachings, maybe some other Anabaptist content, and kind of, I don't know, how maybe a little bit of here's the things that we used to believe and here's what we think of those things now. Some of that sort of thing as well. I think that'd be interesting to people and maybe be something that is useful to people still in the Anabaptist communities.
Yeah, and we'll be as generous to our own tradition as we were to the Calvinists today. We were surprisingly generous to them today.
Yeah, no promises. It just depends on what mood I'm in, how
Yeah,
ornery a mood I'm in at the time. So it's Lent, so I'm, trying to be nice during Lent. But
that's good.
once Lent is over, guys, watch out. All right. I don't know that I have anything more to say. John, you got anything more to add before we sign off?
No. Thanks for listening, and thanks for the comments.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and until next time, we wish you all once again peace in Christ.